Today we're going to look at this powerful new feature in Unreal 5.5 called dynamic binding that's available in Sequencer. So I have a simple sequencer here with a character and an object, and when it plays, it basically lifts the object into the air. Now using dynamic binding, you can bind any other object or actor in the scene to this object that you've added into Sequencer without needing to add it, just by using the binding properties. So by default, this one has a replaceable binding property. There are other options available like possessable, spawnable from director blueprint, and so on. And it's just a simple sequencer. And the way that it is triggered is that I press a key, it creates a level sequence, and it plays it. And basically, whatever the actor is looking at, whichever other actor, it will play the level sequence on that actor. So if we just see how that works, if I play the level, so if I look at this big rock and I press 1, it will play the level sequence by binding to that rock, or to this rock. Or if I go here to the fire truck, it will bind the level sequence. And if I look at the crate, it will do the level sequence on that. If I was to, for instance, add just another shape to the scene there, and maybe make it slightly bigger, and then I was to just look at that using the same level sequence with no other changes, it will play it on that as well. Now in the past, in order to accomplish this, it was a lot more complicated. You would have to go to your level sequence and you would have to find the instance, you would have to override the instance data, change the transform origins, change the binding overrides. And this simple approach that we had here, you would need to use in your blueprints all of these other nodes. Now I've done a full video on this, on how you can reuse Sequencer using these nodes, so I'll link to that. But instead of that, we now have dynamic binding available using in Unreal 5.5. So today we're going to look at how to implement it. So I've created a new level, and to that level I've added the third-person character that comes with the template, and I've placed it at 0, 0, 0. And then I've just added this object here, which is just a static mesh on an actor. So now we can create our first level sequence. We go up here and say add level sequence, and we can put that in our rebinding, and we'll call that level sequence dynamic rebinding. And we can save that. So this opens up our level sequence. To this level sequence, we will add our character first. So we'll say add actor to sequence third person character. That will add the third person character. We can get rid of the control rig because we don't need that. And on the mesh, we will maybe just add an animation. So we'll call this I have this raise cast animation that we will utilize. It's a bit slow, so we will maybe double the length of it. And we can just give it a bit of blending at the start and the end. So that will just play a very simple animation on our player character, as we can see there. And we'll go to the end of our sequence and we'll set that as the length. Now the one thing that you will notice is if we were to just play this and trigger it in our third person character. So again, I press the key, create a level sequence, I play it, and I've just bound it to the onFinished event here so we know when it's completed. And I'll change this to our dynamic rebinding that we're working with. So I'll save that. Now the first problem we're going to get is if I just move our player start slightly, and I close that. When we play and we trigger the sequence, it triggers it on the actor in the level and not on the player character. So how do we rebind this actor that we've added to our player character? So if we go back to our level sequence, if you right-click on the third-person character and you look at the assign actors, you can change it there. The binding properties by default are to the third-person character in the level, but there is a convert selected binding. We can change it to a spawnable, replaceable, spawnable from director blueprint, or replaceable from director blueprint. And these are probably the two most useful ones. We actually want to replace the one that's in the level with our player character that we're going to spawn and we are controlling. So if we go to this side, we can either create a new endpoint, or if we go to the quick bind, there is a built-in resolve to player pawn dynamic binding. We click on that, it will open the director blueprint, and this will utilize a built-in function, resolve it to the player's pawn, and return that value as the object to be possessed. So now if we go back, what I'm going to do is I won't make any changes here just to demonstrate an issue. So we'll play. And now the animation will actually play on our player pawn. However, we keep snapping back to the original location. So the reason for that is very simple, and that is that we have a transform track. And as a theme throughout this tutorial, if you get issues with location problems, just delete the transform track if you're not using it. So now whenever we play our level, it will play it on our player pawn wherever it is. So it's dynamically rebound to the actual player pawn, even though we'd added a third-person character to the level. So that's the player pawn rebound to. Now if we want to go back and add the rock, so we can click on the rock and then we can just say actor to sequence and add the rock there. We want to animate the rock, so we will add a transform track to that rock. That will give us location, rotation, and scale. If we right-click on the transform in the sequencer, we should get the option here on the blend type to change it. So by default, it's absolute. However, if we want to bind it to different rocks or objects, we probably want to do an additive. So we'll change that to additive here. As we don't want to change the rotation or the scale in this tutorial, it's best to just remove them if you're not using them. And what we can do is just set all this back to 0 by default. And just key that. So the rock will start off at 0 to begin with on the Z. And as we do our animation here, maybe we still want it to be 0 at that point. And then as we come towards the end, we can just lift it up off the ground. And we can key that in as well. So if we go back, we save, it should play like this. So if I close that and I play, again, whenever I do it, it should play both of those animations. If we don't want the rock to drop to the ground, the easiest way of doing that is go to the transform, go to selection here, and on project default, just change it to keep state. So it will stay in the air. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to dynamically rebind this. So if I take that rock there and I just duplicate it and just make this one a little bit bigger, if we wanted it to dynamically rebind from this rock to this rock, depending on whether the player was looking at which one, then again we'd have to go to our BP rock here. We can right click. By default, its binding property is possessible to the rock in the scene. However, so we have options here. So the two main ones, as I said, are probably spawnable and replaceable. Again, because these objects are in the scene, we want to go for replaceable from Director Blueprint. This time, we don't want to use the built-in one, because that's just for the player character, but we can use the create new binding endpoint. So if I click that, it will open up this Director Blueprint with this function for us. And this needs a return value. So if I split the pin, it needs an object to be sent back, and there's an option to click whether it's possessed or not. So if you click it, it will be possessed in the sequence. If you don't, I think it just means it will be spawned. So how are we going to find which object we want to bind to? The easiest thing might be by just doing a line trace from the player to whatever is in front of it and sending that back as the object to be bound to. So we can do a line trace by channel. And this is all, I'll just set this up. So this is a basic line trace. We get the player character, the forward vector, the actor's location. We trace for, say, 10 meters or 1,000 units in front. And we then should get a hit result, which will come out of the line trace. And that hit result is a result we will send back as the object to possess. So if we break that, and if it exists, it will be sent back. If it doesn't, there will be nothing to bind to. And if it exists, it will be possessed by the sequencer. So we can compile that, save it, go back here. And now, if we play this, so if I close it, and if I just maybe add another rock there, I play. So now if I look at this rock, it will dynamically bind to that rock. And if I look at this rock, it will dynamically bind to this rock. And that could be part of your sort of gameplay mechanic. Now, the one thing that you notice is that whenever you use this dynamic binding, so in both we've got the person character, third person, and the rock, is that when you play the game, those two objects no longer exist in the level. So what the sequencer does is it looks for something else to bind to when it needs to play the actual level itself. But this way, we've now got it binding to both of our objects in the scene. So if I add another static mesh that I've got from Fab, even though that static mesh is not in the actual scene itself, it should automatically rebind to it using the same logic. So if we play, and we just go to look at the fire truck and press 1, it should lift that in the air, just as it does with any of the rocks. And again, none of these objects are actually in the sequencer. They're all being dynamically rebound during gameplay. The same thing would happen if we just added a shape to the scene. Again, if I do a line trace hits, it will lift it up off the ground. There is also a custom binding option available. So I've just added the cylinder as a test. If you right click and go to converted, there is also this custom binding, which allows you to create a new replaceable binding class. So if I click on that, and if I just say, we'll just take the name they're given. Basically, this allows you to send back a replaceable class with your own custom type or custom class. So again, the same logic that we used in the rock, we could find another object to send back here. And when we split it, it is the same. It just takes a return value. On this side, it gives us a resolve context, which we can break. And that should give us access to the world context and other information. There are also other overridable functions here, like init replaceable binding. So this is after the binding is created, so you can initialize the data with any information from the source object you are replacing. And there is also a supports binding creation from object, which allows you to, as it says, can create a binding from the passed in object. So again, you can use the object reference that is coming in and tick it accordingly. So the advantage of this would be that you could use this type in different sequences far more easily to spawn, or to actually replace objects in your level sequences. So that will be useful depending on how many sequences you are creating in your game. So let's look at spawnables, and say for instance we wanted to spawn a Niagara system under whichever object we were lifting off the ground. So that's this kind of what our Niagara system looks like. So I've added it to the scene. Now if we add that to our same level sequence that we're using, so acted a sequence, we can do the Niagara system. With this Niagara system, we'll want to have a Niagara component. And with the Niagara component, we'll want to have probably a system toggle track, so when it's activated and not. Now we don't want to, we want to spawn this rather than use one in the system. So let's see how we can do that. So if we go here and we go to convert binding, we try spawnable from director blueprint. So we click on that. So this will bring us to the director blueprint, and we'll need to return an object. So we could say spawn system at location. And we can use the one that this Niagara system that we were using. The location that we want to do now, if we want to do it under the object that we're lifting off the ground, can we maybe keep a reference to it here? So we could promote that to a variable. And this will be our lift object, the one that we're lifting off the ground. That should be okay, I think. Then we can go here and we can get our lift object, and we can get actor location. Maybe put all that in there. And we can send this back as our return object to be possessed. So this will be spawned. So we don't want it to be spawned straight away, so we can undo that. We don't want it to be activated straight away, so we can undo that. And maybe if I just move this out of the way so we can see how the animation is playing. So as it lifts it up around here, maybe a bit lower down, we can spawn it. So maybe we'll spawn it here, and we'll activate it as well, though it should be activated automatically. Now if we save that, we'll want to get rid of the transform track because we're not changing anything on that. We've seen the issues with it, so let's just remove that and we can save it. So if we now close our sequencer, go back to our level, and if we play, it should hopefully spawn it under the object, as it does there and here. So this is a spawnable Niagara system we're using, and wherever we do it, it is correctly rebinding it for the spawnable side. In the next video, we'll look at how we can add a camera to our scene and how we can sort of dynamically rebind it. So when you click, you get the camera, and we'll see how you can dynamically rebind this cinema camera actor in order for it to work on the sequence like all the actors do.